morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're watching this. And this is a bit strange, isn't it? Because we're doing a true crime video today in colour. And now there's two reasons for that. The first reason is that my ring light does not want to work. So when I put the camera on and then I put it in black and white, I just literally look like a floating head, and we can't be having any of all that. Secondly is because I need to show you this. Now, I absolutely love this. This was something that I purchased from Vinted and had custom made because we are actually going to be moving rooms. I'm creating a room at the moment that's going to have a little true crime corner, so I won't have to keep putting a blanket on this guitar, and it will have all bits and bobs around me that I just absolutely love, and it will be a permanent setup for true crime and spooky, macabre other videos that I create. So I went onto Vinted. I think that's an app that everyone has around the world. But if you don't have it, it's effectively a nice little selling app where people sell things for cheap, but there's also some really creative people on there. And on there, I found this. So this is a VHS which has got beautiful LED lights in it, and you can have it any LED colour, and you can have any movie that you can think of in the middle. And I chose The Evil Dead 2013 because it is one of my favourite horror films of all time ever. Now, the other reason why this piece is so important today is because when I was talking to the Vinted seller, who is called Jonathan and I actually got into a bit of a conversation, and we discussed what the light would be used for, and when he found out that I did true crime content, he actually recommended and requested today's case. So thank you, Jonathan, for requesting the case today and making this beautiful piece for me. If you would also like one of these pieces, then I will leave a link in my description below. So today's case has been quite difficult to research. Not the case itself, but the early years before the crime happened. And it seems really weird to me because this case is horrific. And at the time that it happened, there must have been so much information about it and about the victims and the person who committed these crimes. But it seems that unless a case goes utterly viral, they don't tend to look into the background and the early years of those involved. So I will try and give you as in-depth information to this case as I possibly can. But unfortunately, we're not going to start too much before the case actually took place. So this is the case of Michael Atherton, the Horden shootings. Michael Atherton was a 42-year-old taxi driver who lived in Horden near Peterlee in County Durham. And as I say, there is very little to find about the early years of Michael Atherton and even about his personality and life before this crime took place. But what I can find is that he was really obsessed with weapons. And if you know what I mean by this, the firing kind. I have to put it like that because of YouTube's rules, but I hope you know what I mean. The sort of weapons that are legal in America, but are not legal in the UK. He was absolutely obsessed with them, and what he loved the most was the power that he got from having them. Now you might think, well, Michael lived in England, so he must have had these illegally. Well, no, actually, he obtained a license and had them through very legal channels. He in total had 6 weapons, and 3 of them were this kind. And also something that is a huge red flag is that Michael would actually get drunk and show these off proudly to his friends. It would happen whenever they had guests around, like a house party or dinner with friends, but Michael would really love to take people upstairs and show them his weapons. He would also be found cleaning and polishing them daily. He was an extreme fanatic and loved everything about them, to the point that he would also go hunting. He would keep them upstairs in the bedroom of the family home so that he was never too far away from them. His partner was 47-year-old Susan McGoldrick, who was a beautiful lady who basically just really enjoyed having a good time. She was very social, she had a lot of friends, she was very close to her family, and she would often like to go out. She would like to wear makeup, she would do her hair nicely, she just overall liked to look nice, you know? She would take good care of herself, and she was known as a feisty, funny, and a good, kind-hearted person. She adored Amy Winehouse and would love to listen to the album Back in Black. Her daughter Laura mentions that she believes she liked this album so much because she could relate to the lyrics. Amy Winehouse was struggling with different things, and Susan was struggling too. Not with any kind of substance abuse, however, but with that of domestic violence from Michael. And I did just mention as well that Susan really liked to take care of herself and put makeup on and look nice, but she felt that she could only do this when Michael was not around. Through the 20 years that they were together, Michael had a lot of control over her, and quite simply, he enjoyed it. She had been through a lot by the hands of Michael and lost out on doing a lot of things because of it. Laura mentioned that she saw her mother as an incredibly strong person, and she was inspirational to her. Susan had 2 sisters, Mavis and Alison, and a brother called Norman. Susan had 2 children, Laura, which was her daughter, and a son. There was one source I found that did say his name, and I believe it to be true, but because it was so hard to find, I'm not going to put it in here, just because normally in cases when you can't find something easily, it's because they don't want that information to be found. And for the sake of privacy and confidentiality, I'm not going to put his name in this. But just note that Susan had 2 children. So in 2008, there is a huge argument in the family home. The people that were there were Michael, Susan, Laura, Alison, and Susan's son. And I'm not quite sure what the argument was about, but this did not seem uncommon. But this argument was particularly bad. And after the argument, Michael said, "I'm going to go upstairs and..." So upon hearing this, Michael goes upstairs. Susan then decides to phone the police. And she tells the police everything. And the police then say, "Right, go out to the back garden and just wait there for us." But when the police arrive, they've all given their statements, but when they go and find Michael, they actually find that he's pretending to be asleep upstairs. He said that Susan was lying and none of this happened. But because Laura, her brother, Susan and Alison were all witnesses to this, they arrested Michael and then they confiscated his weapons. So the police decided to confiscate his weapons, but they did not revoke his license. And to add insult to injury, just a few months later, Michael had his weapons back. And that's just crazy to me. I don't know what was said in the statements, but I can believe that multiple people said about the domestic abuse that had been happening for years. All of them would have also said that he had gone upstairs to do what he said he was going to do. But even so, the police didn't see this as a red flag and decided to kind of slap him on the wrist and then give him back his weapons anyway. I really feel in this moment the police absolutely messed up. And now the police wouldn't have thought that they had done anything wrong here because there's no further incidents recorded until winter of 2011. And now in winter 2011, this is another 3 years of domestic abuse and violence. Because even though Michael Atherton got arrested and had his weapons confiscated, that wasn't enough to stop him. He didn't change his behaviour at all, and he definitely didn't change how he was treating Susan. So in winter 2011, Susan did something very, very brave. She decided to end her relationship with Michael. She was over it. She was done. She didn't want to be treated the way she was being treated anymore. And because she was done with the toxicity of Michael and the violence and the not being able to be herself, she made the very brave decision to leave. Michael was not happy that Susan had left him. So what did Michael do? Oh well, Michael decided to say that he had health issues and that actually he couldn't move out over the winter period. He convinced Susan that he was really unwell and that the idea of moving and moving all of his possessions and quite simply having a breakup over the Christmas period would have not been good for him. So, as I said earlier, Susan was such a wonderful, kind person. They made a compromise that 2011 he would stay with them, he would have Christmas with the family, but as soon as it was 2012 he would have to leave. And Michael agreed. He said that he had full intention of moving out. He said, you know, that's the best way for the relationship, that they separate amicably. But this was all for show. Michael had other ideas. On New Year's Day 2012, so the 1st of January 2012, Susan decided to have a conversation with Michael because she wasn't too happy. She had hoped that Michael and the family would literally have Christmas together, that he wouldn't still be living in the house past Christmas Day. But what would definitely not happen is that he would still be living there in 2012. So because it is now the 1st of January, Susan is now frustrated and she tells Michael that you have to move out tomorrow. So we do have another name in this section which isn't so easily found, so we will call him Alison's partner. So it's New Year's Day and Susan has decided that she's going out. she's no longer being held by Michael. So she, her sister Alison, Alison's partner, and Alison's daughter Tanya decide to go to the rugby club. Laura is still at home, and I believe that Laura's brother's home as well, but again, he is not mentioned. But the other person that we know is definitely in the house is Michael, because Michael at this point should be getting his stuff together so that he leaves by January the 2nd. So at the same point that Susan has gone out to spend some time with her sister and her sister's family, Michael is at home with Laura. And Michael was apparently up in Susan's bedroom making quite a bit of noise. So Laura decided to go and check on Michael and see what was happening. And when Laura walks into the bedroom, she sees that Michael has got all of his weapons out on the bed. Now Laura's a bit perplexed because normally he gets out one of the weapons and plays with that one, but also he's meant to be leaving and there's no signs of packing. So Laura says to him, "What are you doing?" And Michael responds with, "Well, early tomorrow I'm going out shooting." So Laura is a bit fearful of Michael, but he does go hunting, so she didn't think too much of this. So we know that Michael liked control. Well, Susan hadn't told Michael where she was going for the evening, so Michael wanted to find out where she was and who she was with. And Michael then finds out that she's at the rugby club with Alison and Alison's family. And when he found out that she was with Alison, he snapped. And there was two reasons for this. He knew that she would be out having a good time, and he didn't like that. He also knew that she was with Alison, and he also didn't like that. And the reason why he didn't like the fact that she was out with Alison is because he believed that Alison is the reason that he was arrested in 2008. So immediately, when Michael finds out this information, he leaves the house, he gets in the car, and he races off to the rugby club. Now, there isn't a strict timeline of events here, but what is confirmed is that he got to the rugby club, he charged in, he made a huge argument with Susan, and she decided that because it was a bit embarrassing, she would take him outside and have the argument outside. The argument got even bigger. And now normally, what would happen is that Susan would fold to Michael's requests. And in this argument, he's basically saying to her, "Don't make a fool of yourself and come home now." But what did Susan do next? She went back into the rugby club and left him to go home alone. And this was completely out of character for Susan. She was never normally able to go against what Michael wanted from her, but she really was done with the relationship and the control that Michael had over her. But this, unfortunately, would be where things start taking a very fatal turn. It's in this moment that psychologists believe that this is when Michael realised he had lost his control over her. So he does return home, and Susan, Alison, Alison's partner, and their daughter Tanya decide to continue enjoying their evening. The evening is continuing, and Susan refuses to let what has just happened ruin her evening. But as the night goes on, she receives a text from Michael, and it is a warning that if Michael sees her tonight, there will be trouble. It's also said that he suggested that he would stay in a hotel that night to avoid further arguments, but I don't get why he couldn't just move out in that moment, go stay with a friend, go stay with a family member. Again, I don't know, unfortunately, what his social circle and what his family life was like. I don't know if there was someone's couch that he could go and sleep on, but he made it somewhat easy to suggest that he could go and stay in a hotel, so why didn't he just leave that night? He was going hunting the next day with friends, presumably, so why couldn't he just go and stay with them? Unfortunately, we will never know. I do have a feeling, though, that Michael wasn't sincere with the idea of staying in a hotel, because that would have made it too easy for Susan. I think he wanted to stay at home that night, and the reasons why are as follows. So it's a little later into the evening, and Susan has pretty much disregarded the text messages, because she's no longer going to be the victim of Michael. So with this, she then decides that she's having a great time and she wants everyone to continue having a great night as well. So why doesn't everyone who was out at the rugby club come back to hers? Just for like another drink. And so Alison says, "Well, what about Michael?" And Susan basically says, "Don't worry about him." So Susan, Tanya and Alison decide to get a taxi back, but for some reason Alison's partner decides to walk. Now, I really don't know why that happened, but in any case, the three of them get a taxi and Alison's partner walks back to the house. And in the car, Susan is talking to Alison and Tanya. She says that Michael is most likely going to be there, but don't worry about him, have a drink, enjoy your night. And so when they do get home, Alison's partner is still walking. He's not quite made it back yet, but Susan, Alison and Tanya then go sit in the living room with Laura, and Susan gets a drink. She gets a drink for her friends, and then they decide just to sit in the living room chatting for a bit. And of course, Michael is there. And the more that Susan is just carrying on her evening and enjoying herself, the more that Michael is visibly irritated. He truly thought that his actions earlier would be enough to stop her having a good night. And the fact that she has now come back to the house, laughing, joking, and chatting with her friends as if nothing happened is really, really frustrating him. He hoped that she would be defeated, but she is anything but. Susan then decides to tell Laura what had happened outside the rugby club. And of course Susan would do that. Laura is her daughter and they are incredibly close. But Susan then decides to tell Laura something that we didn't know until now. Susan tells Laura that Michael hit her. And so Laura got very understandably angry with Michael. And Laura decided to square up to Michael and say, "Why did you hit my mum?" Michael then got incredibly angry and denied this accusation. This then led to a full-blown argument, and Laura swears at Michael and tells him to get out of the house. And Susan just says to Laura, "Leave him, he's not worth it, don't worry about him." But all this does is angers Michael further. He realises he's surrounded by her entire family and those that love her, and everyone is supporting Susan. So with this, Michael decides to leave the house. And when he does leave, he decides to go straight to the trunk of his car. Unknowingly at this point, Michael had put all of his weapons in his car, ready for the hunting day tomorrow. He decides to load the weapon and come back into the house. So he's loaded this weapon, he's come back into the house, and he's immediately tried to find Susan. He finds her in the kitchen and she has got her back to him. And without a second of hesitation, he fires the weapon, hitting directly into Susan's back. Everyone who was at the house that night saw the fatal attack happen, and then the house erupted into hysteria. Laura said that she felt conflicted in this moment because there was half of her that just wanted to run and be by her mum's side, hug her and just see if there was anything that she could do to help her. But the other half of her was just telling her to run and escape Michael. So Tanya and Laura, hand in hand, ran through the house to try and escape Michael, but then Michael shoots again. He manages to hit Tanya directly, and the blast of the shot manages to hit Laura. However, Laura could keep running, and she managed to get upstairs to her bedroom, jump out of the bedroom window onto her neighbour's balcony with the intention of dropping into next door's house for safety. So I know I said that everyone had seen this fatal attack happen to Susan, but there was one person missing, and that one person was Alison. Now all of this unfolded in about 2 minutes, and for those 2 minutes, Alison was in the bathroom. She heard the shots and she came out to find what was happening. And in absolute horror, she immediately sees Tanya, her daughter, in the dining room, dying. And like any mother would, she immediately runs to Alison to try and help her. And in that moment, Michael decides to turn the weapon towards Alison and unalive Alison too. And in the blink of an eye, Michael then turns the weapon upon himself. It mentions in multiple pieces of research that 4 people managed to escape and survive that night. 2 of those people would be Laura and Alison's partner, but the other 2, again, their names aren't mentioned, so I didn't try to find who they were, but I can only presume that one of them was Laura's brother, Susan's son. And as I've just mentioned, one of the survivors is Alison's partner. He is still walking back from the rugby club, but when he does finally make it back to the house, he walks into what must have been the worst thing imaginable. He sees that Susan has passed away in the kitchen, and when he walks a little further, he sees that Alison has passed away in the dining room. He also then sees Tanya, but Tanya is still alive. He notices that she's struggling, and so he tries to do all that he can to save her. He tries to clean the blood from her airways with his fingers, which must have been utterly traumatic. He said he managed to tell her that he, her brother and Alison loved her. She then very gently gripped his hand before she too passed away. Mavis, the sister of Susan and Alison, was on holiday when she got the call that her sisters had passed away. She said that she wished that she'd never gone on holiday because if she hadn't, she would have had more time with her sisters. But I do believe that if she was also there that night, I don't think she would have made it. After the tragedy, coroner Andrew Tweedle said that the 3 victims would still be alive today if more robust, clear and accountable procedures had been in place at Durham's police gun licensing unit. Laura believes that her mother saved her that night, and because Laura got out, she feels guilty to be alive. Since that fatal night, County Durham police say that this case caused a huge change in the force's procedures. Extra staff were hired to be on the force, outdated paper processes have become digitalised, and daily checks of the police systems were introduced to identify any potential red flag behaviour by licence holders. Today, if officers have any concerns about someone's suitability to hold weapons, we will seize those guns first, then carry out a review of the holder's suitability to have access to firearms. Alison's son Bobby became a tireless anti-gun campaigner in the wake of the tragedy. His work prompted the Home Office to issue new guidance around awarding firearms licences to people with a history of domestic violence. To date, Bobby is still fighting to make it mandatory for police forces who make decisions about licences to follow this guidance. What was quite scary for me to find out was that the UK has 42 police forces, and in each of those police forces, their approach to handling gun licences is dependent on the police force. So what is one rule for one may not be a rule for another. And I think without strict consistency, we will continue to face problems like this. I did not know that UK individuals could carry a licence to possess firearms. I was ignorant enough to believe that it was just police and farmers. For a long time, the outcome of murder that resulted from an argument didn't seem to justify why Michael did this. Investigations went on to see if Michael was suffering from any form of mental health, but investigators did go and speak to his GP and he had no history of mental health issues. It is now believed that simply because he lost control over Susan, he decided to take her life. He lost control over someone that he had abused and controlled for so many years, and he wanted to take back the control in the worst way possible. He also managed to take control of his own life instead by not allowing the police to arrest him. Mavis, Susan and Alison's sister, says that Michael left behind a trail of devastation, but she absolutely hates thinking of it like that because she knows that Michael would have loved to believe that that's what he did. So that is the horrific case of Michael Atherton in the Horden shootings. I am so shocked that this case is not better known. It is utterly horrific, and it looks like the aftermath of this case is going to be such a huge impact on firearm licensing in the UK. And I personally think this case should be better known because it just shows what can happen when firearms are put into the wrong hands. Laura is truly incredible. She holds a lot of guilt over what happened that night, but she absolutely shouldn't. She defended her mum, which we would all do. She managed to escape in such a scary way. It was so clever, but she managed to jump from her bedroom into the neighbour's house. That's incredibly brave, especially when you're in a state of pure shock and fear. Alison's son Bobby is also an amazing person. He has managed to turn his hurt into doing something complete and utterly positive, and unbelievably not already a law. It seems completely unreal to me that in 2024 we do not have a cohesive blanket response in regard to firearms in the UK. I hope he achieves the legislation that he's after, and I fully support him. As always, I'd like to shout out Chris, who is my very first Patreon. If you want to become part of the Patreon family, I will leave a link in my description below. But for now, that is all from me. I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week ahead, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye for now.